3 syllables, just 3. Jesus didn't leave a long prayer, nor a complicated ritual, nor words to be repeated mechanically. He left a simple sound, short, that, when pronounced correctly, creates something powerful around you. It's not about asking, it's about activating. You know that strange feeling that something is watching you, that weight in the air when you wake up in the middle of the night and the room is too silent, that which seems like a presence, but you see nothing, that disappears. All your life you learned that praying means kneeling, putting your hands together, closing your eyes and begging. That's how your parents did it, your grandparents. The church taught it, everyone repeated it, but no one explained why. Often, nothing changed. What if the problem was never a lack of faith, but a lack of understanding? There is a word, a sound that is not meant to ask for anything, but to awaken something that already exists within you. When this is activated, that which feeds on fear, anxiety, and guilt simply loses access, as if a tap were turned off. When Jesus said, "Ask in my name," he wasn't speaking of ending prayers with a nice phrase or repeating words like a meaningless mantra. He spoke of something much deeper, something that over the centuries was hidden, forgotten, or removed from the texts we now call canonical, a truth that transcends superficial formulas and touches directly the heart of the spiritual experience. This teaching of Jesus invites us to look beyond words and understand the essence of communication with God, the dimension in which our will aligns with the divine will, and faith transforms into action, understanding, and real power of inner transformation. Asking in His name is not just invoking a title, but tuning into the presence of Christ, understanding His mission, and adopting a posture of surrender, trust, and deep alignment with God's purpose. And it all begins with a discovery made in Egypt in 1945, when a group of peasants, exploring the banks of the Nile, found a collection of ancient manuscripts in Nag Hammadi. These texts, hidden in clay jars, remained intact for centuries, preserving teachings far from the knowledge of most traditional Christians. Among them were Gnostic Gospels and treatises written in Coptic, offering a radically different view of the life and teachings of Jesus. These documents revealed layers of spiritual knowledge that had been deliberately suppressed or ignored during the standardization of Christianity by the Roman Empire. Among these texts, some passages shed light on the deep meaning of "ask in my name," showing that Jesus referred to an internal alignment with the divine, an awakened consciousness capable of accessing God's presence directly and personally, not an external ritual or mechanical repetition of words. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the texts found in Nag Hammadi, contains sayings attributed to Jesus that do not appear in the canonical Gospels. It emphasizes the pursuit of inner knowledge, the illumination of consciousness, and the direct experience of the kingdom of God, showing that asking in my name was intimately connected to spiritual awakening and the understanding that each action, each prayer, is a reflection of the individual's connection with the divine. Asking in the name of Christ means attuning to His essence, understanding the path of wisdom, and allowing the divine light to manifest through our intentions and choices. It is not a matter of manipulating external forces, but of transforming the heart itself, becoming a channel of love, compassion, and justice that resonates with God's will. These texts reveal that the early Christian tradition was far richer and more diverse than the standardized version we know today. The first Christian communities experienced the presence of Jesus in different ways, often mystical and direct, without relying on intermediaries. There was an awareness that true prayer is not limited to words, but to intention, faith, and a deep understanding of the divine. When Jesus said, "Ask in my name," He was teaching about the spiritual authority that arises from alignment with God, about the power faith awakens when consciousness becomes lucid and receptive to the spiritual reality. This perspective was largely obscured by centuries of institutionalization and the control of texts and teachings. The discovery of Nag Hammadi offers us a window into this forgotten dimension. In the Gnostic Gospels, asking in the name of Christ involves recognizing the presence of divinity in every person, in every action, and understanding that the name of Jesus is more than a word. It is a symbol of connection with the divine principle that dwells within each of us. It is realizing that prayer, when done with awareness and genuine faith, becomes an act of transformation, not just of request. Jesus taught that the power of prayer does not lie in mechanical repetition, but in awakened consciousness that perceives the unity between human and divine, between creation and the Creator. Moreover, these ancient texts reveal that the suppression of certain teachings over the centuries was not merely the result of ignorance or accident. There was a clear intention to control the interpretation of Christ's message, to define limits on what could be considered orthodox and what would be heretical. Teaching that asking in the name of Jesus involves inner awakening, perception, and direct connection with the divine could threaten power structures that relied on intermediaries, rituals, and rigid rules. For this reason, much of the deep spiritual knowledge was removed from the official Gospels, and the deeper layers of Jesus' message remained hidden for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to seek the truth beyond the superficial. When we meditate on this today, we realize that Jesus' instruction remains valid and powerful. Asking in His name is taking responsibility for one's spiritual journey, acknowledging that prayer is not a mere routine, but a tool of inner transformation and alignment with the divine purpose. Every prayer made with understanding, awareness, and true faith has the potential to create profound changes, not only in the individual's life but in the environment around them, reflecting God's harmony and presence in the world. This vision challenges us to abandon superficiality and seek a deeper conscious relationship with Christ, a relationship that transforms not only the mind, but the heart and the entire life. The revelation of Nag Hammadi also invites us to reflect on the role of tradition and history in our spiritual understanding. It shows us that divine truth cannot be fully controlled by human institutions, that there are always dimensions of spiritual knowledge and experience that remain hidden until we are ready to receive them. Asking in the name of Christ involves this preparation, clearing the heart, awakening consciousness, aligning intentions and perceiving the divine presence in all circumstances. It is an invitation to responsibility, depth, and authenticity in spiritual practice. This perspective completely transforms how we see prayer. It is no longer an act of repeating formulas, but an exercise of consciousness, faith, and intention. Every word becomes alive, every thought connects with the divine, every action becomes an expression of alignment with Christ. Jesus taught us that God's power is available to all, but can only be accessed when awakened. Consciousness recognizes the presence of the divine and acts in harmony with it. Asking in His name, therefore, is an experience of unity, direct perception, and manifestation of divine wisdom in our daily life. Reflecting on this discovery, we realize that Jesus' spirituality is dynamic, deep, and transformative. He did not want mechanical followers nor empty prayers. He wanted people awake, aware of God's presence, and willing to live according to this reality. Asking in the name of Christ is therefore more than a ritual act. It is an opportunity to align our being with the divine light, transform our intentions and actions, and actively participate in the flow of grace and power emanating from the kingdom of God. The lesson is clear. True prayer is deep, conscious, and transformative. It requires understanding, presence, and inner alignment. Jesus did not offer easy formulas, but taught a path of spiritual power that manifests when the heart awakens, when faith becomes action, and when life harmonizes with God's will. The discovery of Nag Hammadi reminds us that hidden dimensions of knowledge and wisdom can still be accessed, provided we seek them with sincerity, openness, and dedication, willing to understand the true meaning of asking in His name. Therefore, when we pray today, we can remember that Jesus called us to something profound. Asking in His name is not about beautiful words, but about transformation, awareness, and spiritual alignment. It is entering God's presence with a pure heart, awakened mind, and clear intention, recognizing that every prayer is a reflection of the connection between human and divine, between creation and the Creator. It is ultimately living life as Jesus taught, with consciousness, love, faith, and total surrender to God's purpose, awakening to the presence that has always been and will always be with us. When ancient manuscripts were found inside clay jars, they revealed gospels the church tried to erase from history, texts showing Jesus teaching sound practices, bodily postures, and ways to activate spiritual states through vibration. Before Christianity was standardized by the Roman Empire, dozens of gospels circulated throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, in regions as diverse as Palestine, Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome. Each early Christian community had its own oral and written tradition, transmitting Jesus' teachings in ways that reflected their cultural, social, and spiritual experiences. These Gospels were not just historical records. They were attempts to preserve the living memory of the Christ they had encountered, each illuminating different aspects of his life, work, and message. Some Gospels emphasized his miracles and acts of compassion, others his teachings on the kingdom of God, while others explored more mystical, philosophical, or apocalyptic aspects of his presence and mission. The diversity of these texts showed that the experience of Christ was as vast as the people who followed him. However, not all of these Gospels survived over time. Many were destroyed, forgotten, or deliberately suppressed. The reason was not only the natural deterioration of materials, papyri and parchments degrade over time, but also the theological and political disputes that marked the early centuries of Christianity. As the faith spread and the number of followers grew, intense debates arose over which writings could be considered authentic, inspired by God, or which were human interpretations, often distorted or incomplete. The Roman Empire, upon embracing Christianity as the official religion in the 4th century, ended up playing a decisive role in this standardization process. The Church sought to unify doctrine to maintain the cohesion of a rapidly growing faith, which risked fragmentation due to regional divergences and varied interpretations. In this way, only 4 Gospels were officially recognized as canonical: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These texts were chosen for their theological coherence, broad acceptance among communities, and historical proximity to the events of Jesus' life. Each of them offers a unique perspective. Matthew presents Jesus as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecies. Mark emphasizes his actions and the power of his authority. Luke highlights compassion and the inclusion of the marginalized. John reveals profound aspects of Christ's divinity and the intimacy of his relationship with the Father. Together, these Gospels form a multifaceted portrait of Christ, yet still only a part of the richness that circulated in the first centuries. The Gospels that were not preserved, often called apocryphal Gospels, include texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, and countless others. Many of them contained esoteric teachings, alternative parables, or detailed accounts of mystical experiences with Jesus that did not fit the narrative the Church was consolidating. Some of these texts offered feminine perspectives, highlighting female disciples and women who played significant roles in Jesus' ministry, something not widely emphasized in the canonical Gospels. Others explored spiritual and philosophical dimensions, often aligned with Gnostic currents, questioning the nature of the body, the soul, and salvation in ways that seemed challenging or even heretical to the leaders of the early Church. The destruction of these Gospels was not just an act of censorship, but also of preservation. The Church sought to protect the community from interpretations that could divert the faithful from Christ's central message. At the same time, this meant that part of the spiritual diversity of early Christianity was lost. What remains of the apocryphal Gospels today, often in fragments or late copies, offers only glimpses of a more plural Christian world, where the experience of the divine was understood in multiple ways. These discoveries, such as the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, show that there was immense richness of religious, theological, and mystical thought that flourished before standardization, a tradition that sought to understand God's presence and Jesus' mission in diverse and creative ways. Reflecting on this history invites us to understand the complexity of early Christianity. Before uniformity, there was no single, correct way to follow Jesus. Communities experienced his presence in very different ways, shaped by their contexts and needs. This reminds us that the Christian faith is not static. It has always existed in dialogue with human experience, with the cultures, challenges, and questions of each era. Jesus, in his life and teachings, always invited deep reflection, the search for meaning and the practice of love, compassion, and justice. The multiplicity of Gospels reflects this initial openness to mystery and spiritual diversity. The choice of 4 Gospels, therefore, is only one aspect of the history of how Christianity was structured. Although they became the core of the New Testament and official doctrine, they do not exhaust the experience of Christ. The lost texts, even if destroyed or hidden, continue to provoke us to imagine a faith that could be more plural, more inclusive, and more experimental. They remind us that divine truth cannot be completely imprisoned by human rules. It transcends history and institutional decisions, remaining alive in the experience of each believer who seeks to understand and follow Jesus. Furthermore, the existence of so many different Gospels reminds us of the responsibility of spiritual discernment. Each reader, when confronted with these texts, is called to seek wisdom and understanding from the Spirit, reflecting on which teachings resonate with the truth of Christ and the experience of faith in God. It is not just about accepting or rejecting written words, but cultivating a consciousness sensitive to the divine presence, capable of recognizing the authenticity of Jesus' message even when it presents itself in unexpected ways. By studying the diversity of the Gospels, we also realize how Christian tradition was shaped by historical, social, and political factors, and how this influenced the way we understand Jesus today. Standardization brought unity, but it also selected certain perspectives over others. This challenges us to look with humility at the history of faith, recognizing that the path of Christ is greater than any human institution, and that the search for spiritual truth is continuous and profound. Therefore, remembering that before the official recognition by the Roman Empire, there were dozens of Gospels, helps us value both what was preserved and what was lost. It invites us to open our hearts and minds to the richness of Christian tradition, to the multiplicity of experiences, and to Jesus' call to each generation. Even if many texts have disappeared, the spirit of questioning, contemplation, and seeking the divine remains alive. Each Gospel, canonical or not, is a reflection of the human desire to connect with God, understand His will, and experience Christ's presence in a personal and transformative way. This reflection also leads us to recognize that faith is not only about doctrine or rules, but about relationship, experience, and transformation. Jesus taught us that the kingdom of God is a reality lived daily, in love for others, in justice, compassion, and the sincere pursuit of God. The lost Gospels, therefore, do not leave us merely curious or melancholic. They invite us to expand our understanding of the divine and to engage more deeply with Christ's message, which transcends any human limit of interpretation or control. Finally, the history of the Gospels reminds us that Jesus' message is, above all, alive. It does not depend on specific documents to exist, but on people who seek to understand, practice, and share God's love and truth. The multiplicity of texts, even those that were destroyed, reflects the infinite richness of the Christian experience and invites us to honor the diversity of paths that lead to truth, always guided by the Spirit and the desire to follow Christ in our own lives. The preservation of the 4 canonical Gospels offers us a safe starting point, but the study of ancient texts, even the lost ones, broadens our vision, deepens our faith, and connects us with communities that, centuries ago, sought to live the gospel sincerely, intensely, and transformatively. And those that disappeared had something in common. They taught that sound was a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. Not common words, but frequencies. Ancient traditions in different parts of the world reach the same conclusion without ever meeting. Certain vocalizations alter the body, the mind, and the field around the person. The Essenes, a Jewish mystical group linked to Jesus' formation, practiced this over 2,000 years ago. Eastern monks also, ancient priests as well. The idea is simple. Vibration generates frequency. Frequency alters internal states. Internal states change the reality around. Today, science already recognizes that specific sounds influence the brain, the heart, and even genetic expression. Research in neuroscience, biophysics, and epigenetics shows that certain sound frequencies can induce deep relaxation states, reorganize emotional patterns, and increase nervous system coherence, establishing internal harmony reflected in both mind and body. This means sound is not just an external phenomenon perceived by the ears. It penetrates our cells, alters physiological processes, and activates emotional and cognitive responses that directly impact our health and well-being. In other words, the body responds to sound in a concrete and measurable way. When certain vibrations reach our nervous system, they can synchronize heart rhythms, calm excessive brain activity, and even regulate stress-related hormones, creating a sense of profound balance. This is not mysticism or subjective belief. It is proven biology. Every cell has resonance, every tissue vibrates uniquely and sensitively, and certain frequencies can positively reorganize these vibrations. And when the body achieves balance, something extraordinary happens. Fear diminishes, the mind calms, anxiety loses intensity, and that invisible weight we often feel, a sense of oppression, tension, or disconnection, seems to lose strength. It is as if the body, harmonizing internally, creates a natural safety field that protects the mind and spirit, allowing the person to feel more centered and connected with themselves and something greater. Clinical studies with vocalization techniques, chanting, and specific sounds show that practitioners experience reduced cortisol, greater interhemispheric brain synchronization, improved cognitive performance, and emotional stability. This relationship between sound and the body is not new. Ancestral cultures always understood that certain notes, chants, and tones could heal, protect, and transform. Modern science merely confirms in technical and objective language what the ancients intuited. Sound is a vehicle of balance, healing, and internal transformation. Many people who began practicing sound techniques report significant improvements in areas that previously seemed out of reach. Sleep becomes deeper and more restorative. Anxiety consistently decreases. The sense of emotional protection intensifies, and mental clarity expands. These are not instant miracles, but a gradual process of internal reorganization in which the body, mind, and spirit come into harmony. Over time, practitioners notice subtle but powerful changes. Repetitive and negative thoughts lose strength, previously uncontrolled emotions find stability, and a lasting sense of peace emerges. It is the science of sound working in conjunction with the innate intelligence of the body, revealing that emotional and spiritual balance can be cultivated through simple, accessible, and deeply effective practices. The curious thing is that this knowledge has always existed. There are historical records showing that ancient cultures, from Egypt to India, Greece, and China, recognized the power of sound for healing, meditation, and spiritual protection. Specific sounds were used in temples, sacred ceremonies, and purification practices, often accompanied by breathing, bodily movement, and conscious intention. However, this knowledge was never widely popularized. For thousands of years, knowledge about the power of sound was kept within restricted circles, guarded by those who understood its depth and complexity. The transmission of this knowledge always required preparation, discipline, and respect for the natural laws of life, which would explain why it never became mass knowledge or easily accessible to the general public. Spiritual autonomy is not of interest to systems that live off intermediation. When a person believes they need intermediaries to connect with God, the divine, or their own inner strength, they become dependent, often on institutions, rituals, or authority figures. This dependence creates a subtle form of control. The more someone believes they cannot access internal power or divine presence on their own, the more easily they accept external rules, rigid doctrines, and prescribed practices without question. Therefore, knowledge that grants autonomy, allowing each individual to connect directly with their own consciousness, spirituality, and balance, has always been carefully filtered, hidden, or discredited. When a person discovers that there is a personal, simple, and direct practice, something that can be done alone, in silence, in meditation, or even in conscious sound intonations, everything changes. A sense of spiritual freedom, inner power, and responsibility over one's own life arises. No intermediary is necessary to experience the effects of sound, breathing, or focused intention. The body and consciousness themselves become direct channels of transformation. The realization that it is possible to access balance and protection personally and independently transforms the relationship with spirituality. It ceases to be external, prescriptive, or conditioned by imposed rules and becomes internal, alive, and practical. For this reason, throughout history, such practices were often labeled as dangerous, heretical, or spiritual deception. Not because they didn't work, on the contrary, these techniques always worked, but because they offered freedom and autonomy. A person who becomes aware of their own inner power and learns to regulate their emotions, thoughts, and energy no longer needs to depend on leaders or systems that promote intermediation. This knowledge challenges power structures, questions established authority, and promotes a form of direct and personal spirituality that, for many, is seen as a threat. The freedom to experience the divine for oneself is revolutionary, as it places the individual at the center of their own transformation, taking control away from external forces historically used to maintain dependence and compliance. Today, science confirms what these ancient traditions intuited millennia ago. The body responds to sound, the mind can be reorganized through specific frequencies, and conscious practice has real effects on the brain, nervous system, and genetic expression. This knowledge, when applied, not only improves physical and emotional health, but also strengthens spiritual autonomy. A person discovers that they do not need to wait for permission or external intervention to feel protected, balanced, and connected with the divine. They realize that the practice is direct, accessible, and deeply effective, providing a personal experience of power, clarity, and inner peace. Practicing sound techniques or conscious intonations thus becomes a way to recover ancestral knowledge, rediscover a forgotten tool, and experience spirituality in a practical and living way. Each vocalization, each tone, each frequency becomes a vehicle of balance and transformation, capable of reorganizing the body and mind, calming emotions, and connecting the individual with their own essence. In this way, a new understanding emerges of what it means to protect oneself emotionally, reduce fear and anxiety, and create internal conditions to live more fully, consciously, and present. Therefore, the power of sound is much more than science, mysticism, or tradition. It is the bridge between the body, mind, and consciousness. It reveals that each person possesses the ability to regulate their internal state, experience harmony, and access the divine presence directly, without intermediaries. Personal and conscious practice thus becomes a tool of spiritual freedom, a path of self-mastery, and an expression of the inner power that has always existed but was long kept hidden. Discovering this power is rediscovering one's own capacity for balance, protection, and connection with something greater, transforming daily life, emotions, and the perception of oneself and the world. Another method was to fragment knowledge, teaching how to pray but not how to vibrate, teaching about Jesus but hiding the years he spent learning from deep spiritual traditions, keeping only parts of the story. And when someone questioned, ridicule followed. It still works today. But those who apply it notice the difference. The practice revolves around three main elements: the time of day when the body is most receptive, posture that aligns the nervous system, vocalization that creates internal resonance. At dawn, at dusk, or even in the middle of the night, the human body naturally enters more sensitive and receptive states. During these periods, there is a physiological and energetic synchronization that facilitates internal balance, making the organism more open to conscious practices of attention, breathing, and sound. An upright posture, with feet firmly on the ground, allows energy to flow more organized throughout the body. Deep, slow, intentional breathing acts as a natural regulator of the nervous system, reducing overactivation of the reptilian brain and promoting harmony between mind and body. When sound is added to this practice, intoned with clear intention and inner focus, it creates a vibration that spreads throughout the organism, activating points of balance and synchronizing internal rhythms that normally remain dispersed. This process does not depend on beliefs or imagination. It is a bodily and energetic practice that anyone can experience with discipline and awareness. It is not about imagining supernatural phenomena or creating illusions of external power. It is not about forcing mystical experiences or manipulating invisible forces. It is about feeling calm, present, and stable in a direct and concrete way, allowing the body and mind to respond positively to the practice itself. By focusing on posture, breathing, and sound vibration, a state of mindfulness is created that transforms the perception of oneself and the surrounding environment. The person begins to perceive their emotions clearly, distinguishing passing thoughts from recurring patterns, and develops the ability to observe without being dominated by them. Over time, continuous practice generates deep and lasting effects. Over weeks and months, those dedicated to conscious techniques of breathing, posture, and sound begin to perceive subtle changes that accumulate and transform into significant shifts. Each practice session is not just a momentary exercise, but an opportunity to reconfigure internal patterns, reorganize emotional responses, and strengthen the harmony between body, mind, and consciousness. It is a cumulative process where small daily actions add up, creating effects that manifest in all aspects of life. Many people report that situations that previously triggered anxiety, fear, or emotional disorientation begin to lose intensity. Things that once seemed impossible to face are approached with clarity and stability. Perception changes. What was once interpreted as an immediate threat or problem is now seen as valuable information about internal and external states. Anxiety no longer dominates the body and mind. Fear, which once seemed uncontrollable, loses intensity and becomes manageable. This conscious observation transforms the way each person deals with challenges, allowing more balanced responses and more assertive decisions. Emotions cease to completely dominate, becoming observable information rather than automatic reactions. By developing the skill to perceive one's emotions without being swept away by them, the person begins to recognize patterns, triggers, and conditioned responses. This awareness creates a healthy separation between the observer and what is observed, allowing the individual to choose how to react instead of reacting impulsively or automatically. Over time, this practice strengthens emotional intelligence, resilience, and the ability to make clear decisions, even in situations that would previously provoke emotional instability. Fears that once seemed uncontrollable gradually diminish, and the mind becomes clearer, capable of making decisions with discernment and focus. The transformation is neither superficial nor temporary. It operates at a deep level of consciousness, reorganizing automatic responses and establishing new patterns of functioning. The body learns to respond in a balanced way. The mind organizes thoughts with greater clarity, and consciousness integrates these changes, creating a state of continuous presence. It is as if the internal system is calibrated, allowing the person to experience each moment with attention, intention, and serenity, without being dominated by the emotional chaos that once seemed inevitable. This transformation does not happen instantly, but through a process of internal reorganization, in which body, mind, and consciousness come into alignment. Each practice, each moment of conscious attention, strengthens this synergy. The body learns to relax in patterns that were previously tense. The mind learns to concentrate without distraction. Consciousness perceives subtle patterns and interconnections that previously went unnoticed. This process creates a solid foundation for personal growth, self-control, and emotional balance. It is a gradual yet secure path, revealing the innate potential for reorganization and transformation present in every individual. With constant practice, the individual comes to perceive that negative emotions, fears, and anxieties are not uncontrollable forces, but signals of imbalances that can be recognized and transformed. Each emotion becomes an opportunity for learning and adjustment rather than a permanent obstacle or burden. The mental clarity gained allows repetitive patterns to be identified, the origin of old fears understood, and conscious decisions made that promote balance and well-being. It is a paradigm shift from victim of one's own emotions to conscious observer and manager of one's internal experience. The impact of this transformation extends beyond the personal sphere. As the individual organizes body, mind, and consciousness, they realize that the effects are not limited to their own internal state. Relationships, work, daily decisions, and social interactions begin to reflect the balance achieved. What was once marked by reactivity, impatience, or emotional confusion is now approached with greater clarity, discernment, and presence. The person who develops this internal reorganization responds to situations with more patience, not as an isolated conscious effort, but as a natural consequence of body, mind, and spirit alignment. Compassion emerges spontaneously because the clear perception of one's own experience allows recognition and respect for the experience of others without automatic judgment. Discernment strengthens as the mind becomes capable of analyzing complex situations without being dominated by disordered emotions. Their presence positively influences the surrounding environment. When someone in balance enters a space, there is a subtle perception of harmony and coherence that affects those nearby. Gestures, posture, tone of voice, and facial expressions begin to reflect the stabilized internal state. Interactions become more authentic, responses more measured, and conflicts are approached with greater clarity and empathy. This effect is not only perceived by the individual but also by others, creating a cycle of positive influence that reinforces the practice itself and subtly yet powerfully transforms the environment. Continuous practice creates not only internal effects but also a harmony perceived by others, manifesting in attitudes, body language, and coherent choices. Each action becomes aligned with the conscious perception of one's own state, creating congruence between thought, feeling, and behavior. This internal coherence generates confidence, both internal, in oneself, and external, perceived by those interacting with the person. In work situations, for example, decisions that would have previously been made impulsively or based on fear are now the result of clear, calm, and objective analysis. In family relationships, communication becomes more effective, less burdened by emotional projection, and more focused on mutual understanding. Furthermore, the positive effect manifests in how challenges and unforeseen events are faced. When body, mind, and spirit are aligned, the person develops natural resilience. Problems that would previously cause anxiety, frustration, or fear are now approached as opportunities for learning and growth. Mental clarity allows solutions to be identified more efficiently, while emotional stability prevents hasty or harmful reactions. The resilience generated by this practice is not merely reactive, but proactive. The person anticipates tension patterns, perceives signs of internal imbalance, and applies conscious techniques to maintain stability and presence before external situations cause disharmony. Another relevant aspect is the awareness that one's own choices become more conscious and aligned with internal goals and values. When internal reorganization is constant, the person better understands which decisions reflect their true intention and which are influenced by external conditioning or automatic habits. This clarity promotes freedom of action, reduces feelings of regret, and strengthens the sense of control over one's life. Internal balance ceases to be just an isolated experience within practice sessions. It becomes a continuous foundation guiding behavior, decisions, and interactions. Conscious presence also transforms communication. The person who practices internal alignment becomes more capable of active listening, understanding emotional nuances, and responding with empathy and clarity. Body language, tone of voice, and facial expressions reflect authenticity and coherence, preventing misunderstandings and promoting more harmonious relationships. This effect extends to all levels of interaction, from everyday conversations to complex negotiations, strengthening both personal and professional relationships. Additionally, continuous practice expands the perception of interconnection. When body, mind, and spirit are in harmony, the person perceives subtle patterns in relationships and the environment, understanding how their actions influence the whole. This awareness generates natural responsibility, as each choice is seen as part of a larger system, where internal and external balance are interconnected. The practice ceases to be merely an individual tool and becomes a catalyst for social harmony, amplifying the effects of personal transformation into the collective sphere. The harmony perceived by others also strengthens the practice process itself. When the person observes the effects of their balanced presence in the environment, it reinforces motivation to continue practicing, deepening awareness, attention, and intention. It is a virtuous cycle. The more the person practices and aligns, the more they perceive positive effects, the more capable they feel, and the more they strengthen internal and external balance. This feedback creates consistency and durability in results, making alignment a permanent feature of daily life. Ultimately, continuous practice transforms not only the individual, but also the quality of their interactions and perception of their surroundings. Relationships become healthier and more balanced, decisions more conscious, emotional responses more controlled, and presence more authentic. The impact is profound because it reflects a systemic reorganization of being, body, mind, and consciousness working in synergy to create harmony, clarity, and balance. This expansive effect demonstrates that internal transformation is not isolated, but directly influences the world around, making practice a powerful tool for personal and social change. Furthermore, internal reorganization strengthens emotional resilience. The individual learns to handle challenges effectively, maintaining calm and focus even in complex or stressful situations. This resilience is not innate, but cultivated through daily practice, conscious attention, and clear intention to balance body, mind, and consciousness. Each small victory, each moment of presence and clarity, strengthens the internal system, making it more robust and capable of facing adversity without destabilization. The process also contributes to a profound sense of autonomy. When the person realizes they possess internal tools to reorganize emotions, reduce anxiety, and strengthen mental clarity, they no longer depend on external factors, magic formulas, or mediators to feel balanced. This awareness creates freedom, confidence, and responsibility over one's own emotional and mental life. Spirituality in this context ceases to be something imposed from outside and becomes an internally lived and cultivated experience, capable of generating real and lasting transformation. Each step of this internal reorganization reinforces the connection between body, mind, and consciousness, promoting a continuous state of presence, balance, and clarity. Daily practice, even if brief, accumulates, strengthening neural patterns, reorganizing physiological responses, and expanding conscious perception. The individual begins to notice subtle signals from the body, emerging emotions, and recurring thoughts, using this information to adjust behaviors and choices consciously and effectively. Ultimately, the profound effect of this practice is the realization that transformation and balance do not depend on external circumstances. Fear, anxiety, and mental confusion are not inevitable. They can be modulated, reorganized, and transformed through conscious practice. Each session strengthens the ability to observe emotions, perceive patterns, and respond intentionally, creating a more balanced, centered life aligned with purpose. Internal reorganization, although gradual, is consistent, tangible, and transformative, directly reflecting on physical, emotional, and mental well-being. This approach reminds us that true change is not immediate, but built through discipline, attention, and constant practice. Each step strengthens the synergy between body, mind, and consciousness, creating lasting effects that manifest in clearer decisions, balanced emotions, and greater resilience in the face of adversity. Over time, the individual realizes that what once seemed uncontrollable, fears, anxiety, emotional disorientation, can be managed, understood, and transformed. The continuous process also reveals the depth of self-knowledge. By practicing regularly, the person begins to recognize old patterns, limiting beliefs, and conditioning that shaped emotional responses throughout life. This awareness allows conscious choices to replace automatic reactions, strengthening the sense of autonomy and responsibility over one's own experience. Body, mind, and consciousness become allies, working in harmony to promote balance and clarity, transforming challenges into opportunities for growth and inner strengthening. With constant practice, internal reorganization ceases to be just an abstract goal and becomes a lived experience. The individual feels tension release in the body, clarity in the mind, and presence in consciousness, creating an integrated state of well-being and balance. Each observed emotion, each perceived thought, and each recognized bodily sensation contributes to strengthening the internal system, increasing the capacity to face challenges with serenity, discernment, and focus. In summary, continuous practice generates a profound and lasting transformation in which body, mind, and consciousness come into alignment. Situations that previously provoked anxiety, fear, or emotional disorientation lose intensity. Emotions become observable information rather than automatic reactions. Fears gradually diminish, and the mind becomes clear, focused, and capable of discerning paths with wisdom. This internal reorganization is not instantaneous, but its cumulative effects are tangible and permanent, reflected in the personal, professional, and spiritual life of those who practice with attention, intention, and discipline. Studies in neuroscience and modern psychology confirm that practices of conscious breathing and intentional vocalization influence the limbic system, reducing the excessive release of cortisol, the stress hormone, and promoting greater heart coherence. Heart coherence, in turn, is associated with mental clarity, emotional stability, and a sense of inner protection. When combined with an upright posture and mindful awareness, these techniques become powerful tools for emotional self-management, allowing a person to navigate challenging situations with greater safety and serenity. Furthermore, conscious sound creates resonances that affect the body integrally. Each cell has its own vibration, and specific frequencies can harmonize these vibrations, reorganizing internal patterns and promoting physical and mental health. This is why ancient cultures in different parts of the world always used sound in healing, meditation, and protection practices. Chants, intonations, drums, mantras, and directed vocalizations were ways to align the body and mind with the natural rhythms of the universe, establishing balance and clarity. These methods, though ancient, are corroborated by modern science, which today observes how specific sounds modulate brain waves, heart rate, and even genetic expression, showing that the relationship between sound vibration and human balance is real and measurable. Personal practice of this type of conscious sound is, in essence, a form of spiritual autonomy. By recognizing that the body and mind can respond directly to intention and vibration, the individual no longer relies exclusively on intermediaries, rituals, or external prescriptions to experience balance and protection. This recognition is liberating because it places the individual at the center of their own spiritual and emotional experience, allowing them to discover for themselves how to access states of calm, clarity, and presence. It is an invitation to take responsibility for one's inner life and the ability to regulate emotions, thoughts, and energy consciously. No one needs to believe in mystical or supernatural powers for the practice to work. The method's effectiveness depends on consistency, attention, and clear intention. With discipline, the effects become evident. Patterns of emotional reaction that once seemed automatic begin to be observed and transformed. The person realizes that their responses to challenges do not need to be impulsive, that they can choose how to react, and that they have control over their own internal energy. This creates a sense of security, clarity, and stability that manifests not only internally, but also in interactions with the world around them. The process is gradual but cumulative. Each practice session strengthens the body's ability to enter balance, increasing emotional resilience and mental clarity. Fear loses intensity, anxiety becomes manageable, and the mind gains focus and discernment. This cumulative effect is similar to physical training. The more one practices, the greater the capacity to maintain the desired state. Conscious sound practice, combined with posture and breathing, creates neural circuits that support emotional and mental stability, promoting a state of presence that remains even in challenging situations. Moreover, this approach reminds us that much of what we feel as emotional discomfort or invisible weight is not inevitable. We often believe that anxiety, fear, sadness, or tension are part of life, and that nothing can change them. This perception, however, is limited because it ignores the body and mind's innate capacity to reorganize, balance, and respond positively to internal and external stimuli. Everything we experience as emotional discomfort can be modulated, transformed, and reorganized when we recognize the source, observe the impact, and apply practices that restore balance. It is not a matter of denying emotions or forcing instant change, but understanding that each sensation, tension, or fear carries valuable information about the internal state, and that this information can be used to promote healing, reorganization, and personal growth. Conscious sound practice in this context becomes a powerful tool. It allows a person to perceive their own energy clearly, identifying where emotional blocks, repetitive patterns, or physical tensions interfere with body-mind harmony. By intoning sounds with attention and intention, the individual not only produces externally perceptible vibrations, but also creates waves of internal coherence that reorganize the organism's energetic frequency. Every cell in the body resonates with this vibration, stimulating physiological responses that reduce anxiety, promote deep relaxation, and strengthen the nervous system. Conscious sound acts as a catalyst that transforms internal states of disharmony into states of balance, offering a direct and practical experience of self-care and emotional self-regulation. More than a technique, this practice is an integration of ancestral wisdom and modern scientific knowledge. Elements of neuroscience demonstrate that certain tones and frequencies modulate the brain, synchronize brain waves, and promote greater coherence between hemispheres, facilitating mental clarity and balanced decision-making. Research in bioenergetics indicates that sound vibrations can reorganize muscular tension patterns, release accumulated energy blockages, and restore healthy flow throughout the body. At the same time, ancestral wisdom reminds us that sound has been used for millennia in healing rituals, meditation, spiritual protection, and harmonization of the being, showing that this practice is not only scientific, but also deeply intuitive and spiritual. The result of this integration is tangible and measurable. People who adopt regular conscious sound practices report improved sleep, reduced anxiety, greater mental clarity, and a sense of emotional protection. They notice that the body and mind respond consistently to these vibrations, creating internal states that favor well-being, stability, and presence. More importantly, this practice provides autonomy. The person learns to generate balance on their own, without relying on external factors or intermediaries. They discover that the power to restore harmony is not outside but within, and that small intentional actions can have profound and lasting impacts. Furthermore, understanding and applying this approach changes the perception of life's challenges. Situations that were once interpreted as unbearable or chaotic begin to be seen from another perspective, as opportunities for learning and internal adjustment. Emotional discomfort ceases to be merely a burden and becomes information, signaling areas that need attention, care, or reorganization. This shift in perspective is crucial because it transforms the relationship with emotions and experiences. Instead of reacting automatically and often destructively, the person learns to respond with awareness, balance, and clarity. Conscious sound practice also strengthens emotional resilience. When one realizes that emotions and internal states can be modulated, the person develops confidence in their own ability to cope with adversity. They do not depend on external circumstances to feel stability. They learn to generate an internal center of balance that remains even in the face of challenges. This emotional autonomy is essential for personal growth, mental health, and deep connection with one's spirituality. It is a form of internal training that strengthens body, mind, and spirit simultaneously. Another important aspect is that this approach promotes presence. By focusing on sound vibration, breathing, and body perception, attention shifts from the past and future to the present moment. This state of presence reduces rumination, worry, and anticipatory fears, creating space for clarity, discernment, and a sense of peace. Continuous practice reinforces this ability, making presence a natural and recurring state, not just a temporary experience during practice. In summary, this practice shows that much of emotional discomfort is not inevitable. It can be transformed and reorganized through conscious perception, intentional use of sound, and integration of body, mind, and spirit. By recognizing blockages, tensions, and imbalance patterns, a person acquires the ability to restore harmony, generate mental and emotional clarity, and cultivate a consistent state of well-being. Conscious sound functions as a catalyst, connecting science, ancestral wisdom, and spirituality in a practical, accessible, and deeply transformative way. The beauty of this approach lies in its simplicity and the autonomy it provides. There is no need to rely on complex rituals, magical formulas, or intermediaries. Each person has the ability to apply these practices themselves, observing the results, adjusting the technique, and deepening the connection with their own body and mind. It is an invitation to direct experience, self-knowledge, and responsibility for one's own balance and well-being. Ultimately, this practice demonstrates that the power to transform internal states is always accessible. The body, mind, and consciousness respond consistently to intentional stimuli, and conscious sound is one of the most effective tools to activate this response. By integrating breathing, posture, intention, and vibration, a self-care system is created that operates on multiple levels, promoting harmony, presence, clarity, and emotional resilience. This approach also reminds us that internal transformation is practical, not theoretical. Emotional discomfort does not need to be accepted as inevitable. It can be understood, modulated, and transformed through conscious practices. Each session of conscious sound, each moment of mindful awareness, and each perception of one's own sensations strengthens the ability to generate internal balance, emotional autonomy, and mental clarity. Over time, this practice becomes a natural way of living, bringing benefits that are reflected in behavior, relationships, and perception of reality. In summary, much of the emotional discomfort or invisible weight we feel can be transformed. Conscious sound practice offers a powerful tool to perceive, organize, and harmonize body, mind, and spirit. It combines scientific knowledge, ancestral wisdom, and practical spirituality, allowing each person to experience real and measurable results. This practice teaches that internal balance is not distant or unattainable, but a natural capacity that can be awakened through attention, intention, and deliberate practice, creating a life of presence, clarity, and lasting well-being. In short, dawn, dusk, and the early hours of the night are ideal moments for conscious practices of sound, breathing, and posture, because the body is naturally more sensitive and receptive. By aligning posture, breathing, and sound intention, a state of balance is created that promotes calm, mental clarity, reduction of fear and anxiety, as well as deep emotional reorganization. The practice does not depend on mysticism, miracles, or intermediaries. It depends on attention, discipline, and clear intention. It is a path accessible to all, capable of producing lasting results and providing autonomy over one's own emotional, mental, and spiritual life. This practice teaches us that internal balance is not a distant goal, but a natural capacity of the body and mind that can be cultivated consciously. Over time, situations that once destabilized us lose intensity. Emotions no longer control us. The mind becomes clear, centered, and capable of perceiving available solutions and paths. This transformation is profound, real, and replicable, showing that the power to organize one's internal state has always been and will always be within the reach of anyone willing to practice with intention and mindful attention. It is as if an emotional shield is gradually being built, not because the world changed, but because you changed internally. The transformation that truly matters is not in external circumstances, the people around us, or the events that surround us. It is in the silent, deep internal change that alters how we perceive, feel, and act. When something awakens inside us, even if the world remains the same, everything seems different. The same situations that once caused anxiety, fear, or confusion are now perceived with clarity, serenity, and discernment. The body reacts differently, the mind organizes thoughts more objectively, and the heart ceases to be a hostage to uncontrolled emotions. This internal change is invisible to the world's eyes, but its strength is immeasurable because it alters the essence of who you are. Ultimately, the teaching was never about constantly begging for external help. It was never about relying on intermediaries, systems, or rituals imposed by others. The central idea has always been to awaken something that already exists within every human being, a source of wisdom, power, and balance that depends on no one but yourself. Jesus taught that the kingdom of God is not in distant places or accessible only through mediators, but within us, waiting to be recognized and activated. Prayer, spiritual practice, and connection with the divine are not about mechanical repetition or empty words, but about awakening consciousness, aligning intention, body, and mind, and experiencing God's presence directly. Spirituality, not as dependence, but as activation. This is the key that many traditions and spiritual teaching systems have forgotten or deliberately obscured over the centuries. When spirituality is presented as something that must be sought externally, a relationship of need and submission is created instead of autonomy and freedom. But the truth is that the power has always been inside, and each person can access it through practice, awareness, and intention. Activating internal spirituality means recognizing one's own capacity to balance emotions, thoughts, and energy, to perceive reality clearly, and to act with discernment and purpose. It is not about imposition or blind belief. It is about awakening what has always been present, silent and powerful within each individual. And perhaps the greatest illusion in history has been making us believe that spiritual power comes only from outside, when it has always been accessible from within. From an early age, we are taught to seek outside what can be found within. We look for leaders, gurus, belief systems, and external methods in the hope of attaining balance, peace, or enlightenment. However, when we turn inward, we realize that all the tools, all the resources, and all the strength are already available. Spiritual awakening is, above all, a recognition of one's innate ability to access wisdom, power, and presence. It is understanding that there is no need for intermediaries to touch the divine. The experience is direct, personal, and transformative. The question now is not whether this is interesting. The question is, will you continue on autopilot, living life as someone who repeats patterns unconsciously, as if trapped in a cycle of habits and reactions, or will you experience it for yourself? True transformation does not occur through intellectual interest or passing curiosity. It happens when we decide to act, when we choose to practice, explore, and experience on our own. Every step taken with attention and intention awakens more consciousness, strengthens internal balance, and reveals layers of wisdom that were previously hidden. Knowledge is not enough. It only transforms when it is lived, when it is incorporated into the body, mind, and spirit. Because knowledge only transforms when it is lived. Reading, listening, or understanding spiritual concepts is just the beginning. Real power emerges when what is learned is put into practice. It is the difference between understanding the theory of inner balance and actually experiencing it during moments of emotional or mental challenge. It is the difference between repeating words and aligning intention, breath, and internal vibration consciously. Jesus taught practically, showing that true spirituality is experiential, not dogmatic. What he offered was a key, simple, profound, and powerful, to access what has always been available, but which we often ignore. And what Jesus taught was never about repeating empty words. It was never about magical formulas or superficial rituals that would guarantee automatic results. It was about aligning body, mind, and spirit. It was about tuning into one's own essence and recognizing the presence of the divine in every action, thought, and feeling. This triad, body, mind, and spirit, is fundamental because each dimension influences the others. When the body is relaxed, the mind can think clearly and the spirit feels connected. When the mind is awake, the body responds healthily and the spirit finds purpose. When the spirit is present, body and mind naturally harmonize. This integration is the true practice Jesus proposed, accessible to all who are willing to perceive and activate their own potential. 3 syllables, 1 key. It has always been there. The simplicity of the teaching is intentional, as what is profound often reveals itself in what is direct and accessible. There is no need for external complications, intermediaries, or complex rituals. The key has always been attention, intention, and conscious practice, elements that anyone can cultivate and apply. Recognizing this is liberating because it shows that spiritual power is not something distant or reserved for a few. It is an innate ability, available to all, waiting to be awakened. This key transforms the way we live, think, and feel. It changes our perception of reality, our relationship with challenges, and our ability to respond to the world with clarity and balance. It allows us to perceive that emotions do not control us, that fears can be observed and understood, that the mind can be trained to discern and act consciously. More than that, this internal activation strengthens the sense of presence, security, and connection with something greater, whether called divine, essence, or consciousness. Every step in conscious practice is a step toward inner freedom. The more someone connects with this key, aligning body, mind, and spirit, the more they realize that the answers, strength, and balance they seek have always been inside. It is not a skill that needs to be acquired from the outside. It is a discovery of something that has always existed. And this discovery is profound, silent, and transformative because it changes the reference point, from depending on the external world or authority figures to trusting one's own internal capacity. The great lesson, then, is that authentic spirituality does not create dependence. It awakens autonomy. It invites us to look inward and realize that all the strength, wisdom, and power we seek have always been available internally. It is not about seeking outside what we can access within ourselves, but about activating consciousness to recognize our innate capacity to balance emotions, thoughts, and energy. Authentic spirituality does not promise instant miracles or magical results without effort. It provides tools, practices, and paths that, when applied with discipline and intention, allow the reorganization of body, mind, and spirit. It enables the balancing of emotions, reduction of fear and anxiety, mental clarity, strengthened perception, and living with presence, clarity, and purpose. This is the essence of a conscious life, a path of self-knowledge and self-mastery that does not depend on intermediaries or external factors, but on the decision to awaken and practice. Every person who turns inward discovers that the key has always been there, hidden in simplicity, waiting to be activated through conscious attention, deliberate practice, and clear intention. It is not something complex, distant, or inaccessible. It is simple, direct, and deeply transformative. By realizing this, one understands that true spirituality does not require external formulas, complicated rituals, or intermediaries to determine how spiritual power should be achieved. The power has always been present, but often we did not know how to activate it, how to access it practically and consciously. Therefore, it is not about beautiful words or magical formulas. It is not about repeating phrases or following rituals, hoping to obtain something that is already within us. It is not about following external rules or relying on others to feel power, presence, or connection with the divine. It is about experiencing it for yourself, contacting your own consciousness, and realizing the capacity to access internal balance, clarity, strength, and serenity. It is about aligning body, mind, and spirit, creating harmony that manifests in every action, thought, and choice. This constant practice transforms the way we perceive reality, respond to challenges, and relate to ourselves and the world. The true message that remains is this: spirituality is an internal activation, and it was never about external dependence. It was never lost. It has always been accessible to those who choose to awaken, practice, and live consciously. The key Jesus offered us is simple, profound, and eternal. It requires no complexity. It requires presence, intention, and practice. Every time we turn inward and recognize our capacity to awaken this energy, to reorganize body, mind, and spirit, we feel the real impact of this message in our lives. Life stops being a flow of automatic reactions and becomes guided by discernment, clarity, and purpose. Only no one taught us how to use it. For centuries, systems, institutions, and spiritual traditions created the illusion that spiritual power is always outside, that one must depend on leaders, intermediaries, or prescribed formulas to feel protection, balance, or connection with the divine. But the truth is that this key has always been within each of us. It has always been accessible, waiting to be awakened through conscious attention, constant practice, and clear intention. This forgetting or concealment was not due to incapacity, but often due to interests that preferred maintaining dependence and submission rather than awakening the inner autonomy that Jesus taught. When a person finally understands this, they realize there is no need to constantly look outside for what can be awakened within. All energy, perception, and discernment already exist. They just need to be activated. Spirituality in this sense is a daily, silent, and profound practice that transforms the way we feel, think, and act. Every gesture, every breath, every intentional word becomes part of a process of aligning and harmonizing body, mind, and spirit. This practice leads to tangible results. The mind becomes clearer, fears diminish, emotions become manageable, and the body responds with greater vitality and balance. Moreover, the internal activation of spirituality allows a person to live more consciously and presently. It is not just about techniques, practices, or concepts. It is about perceiving and incorporating the experience of being connected with one's own essence and with the divine within. This awareness generates emotional, mental, and spiritual freedom. The person ceases to be a hostage of automatic patterns, uncontrolled emotions, or external influences. They become the protagonist of their own life, aware that every thought, word, and action can reflect the alignment of body, mind, and spirit. The simplicity of this key is what makes it powerful. There is no need for complexity or elaborate rituals. What matters is intention, practice, and conscious attention. Every moment lived with presence and intention awakens more consciousness and strengthens the capacity to access internal balance and clarity. Daily practice, even if simple, creates cumulative, profound, and lasting changes. Over time, one realizes that what once seemed difficult or unattainable, feeling peace, clarity, inner strength, becomes natural, a consequence of the conscious alignment of body, mind, and spirit. This message also teaches us that spiritual power is not exclusive, restricted to a few, or conditioned by certain rituals. It is universal and innate. Every human being has the capacity to awaken this force, access balance and clarity, and reorganize body, mind, and spirit. The difference lies only in each person's consciousness, practice, and intention. The more one practices, the more this capacity strengthens and manifests in daily life, and the more awake one is to this reality, the more they realize that there is no need for intermediaries or external formulas. The power has always been there, waiting to be recognized and used. Therefore, authentic spirituality does not create dependence, it awakens autonomy. It reminds us that we do not need to seek outside what is already within, and that all power, balance, and clarity are accessible through conscious practice, attention, and clear intention. It shows us that miracles do not happen only as external events. They emerge from the internal reorganization of body, mind, and spirit, from the awakening of consciousness, and from the activation of one's own capacity for transformation. Every person who understands this and applies it in their own life experiences real and lasting change, feeling capable of accessing strength, serenity, and presence at any moment. In the end, this is the message that was never lost. The key has always been there. Simple, profound, eternal, waiting to be used. Every person has the possibility to awaken, practice, and live consciously, accessing balance, clarity, and inner strength that have always been available. The challenge is simply to remember that there is no need to look outside. Everything necessary is within. Conscious practice, mindfulness, and clear intention are the paths to activate this energy, harmonize body, mind, and spirit, and live a life of purpose, balance, and presence. Only no one taught us how to use it. That is why many go through life without realizing that this key is always within reach, waiting to transform the experience of living. The discovery is simple but profound. Everything necessary to access power, balance, and spirituality is inside each of us, waiting only to be awakened, recognized, and lived.